Listen. Tonight I've got a story that feels half legend, half wound that never quite healed. A love so fierce and so outlaw it could only be born in the high, lonely places of the Old West, where jagged peaks claw at a pewter sky and every shadow might hide a rifle barrel. This is the kind of land where fate don't ask permission. It just happens, sudden and merciless. Everything changed with one frozen second. Two strangers locking eyes across chaos, one look that carried more weight than a lifetime of promises. Before we step into their world, if you're already hooked, drop a like and tell me in the comments, what corner of the map are you listening from right now? The winter of 1875 swept into the Sangre de Cristo range like a hungry wolf on the prowl, quiet, unstoppable, and without pity. Thick sheets of snow draped the wild New Mexico badlands, turning the jagged country into a scene both stunning and lethal. Towering peaks stabbed upward like broken fangs against a dull gray sky, while pine trees sagged under heavy loads of ice and powder. A fierce wind screamed down the narrow canyons, carrying the sharp smell of frozen dirt and the hard truth that only the toughest would greet the spring thaw. For countless generations, the Apache had called these mountains home. They knew every twist of every ravine, every secret seep of water, every hidden trail that would finish off any white man in a matter of hours. They ghosted across this unforgiving land without leaving a footprint, harvesting only what kept them breathing, living in deep respect for a world that showed no mercy to the careless. Bishan perched on the lip of a granite ledge, his coal-black eyes sweeping the valley floor with the cold precision of a hunting hawk. At 28 winters, he was young to command a war party, but not a single man doubted his right to lead. His father had been a feared war chief, his grandfather a legend whose name still echoed with quiet awe around Apache campfires. Yet Apache leadership was never handed down like some white man's crown. It was forged in raw courage, hard-won wisdom, and an iron grip on the freedom that defined who they were. The biting cold clawed at his bare skin, but Bishan scarcely felt it. Since boyhood, he had hardened himself against far worse than winter's cruel bite. His long black hair, braided tight with rawhide strips and crowned by a lone eagle feather, fell past his shoulders. His buckskin shirt and leggings were layered with thick fur, warm enough to defy lungs that could turn breath to frost, yet light enough to move fast. His face carried the sharp, proud lines of his people. High cheekbones carved by heritage, a strong nose, a jaw set with quiet power and unyielding will. But his eyes, deep obsidian pools, held the real fire, warm with kindness one moment, blazing with fury the next. 15 of his finest warriors waited in disciplined silence around him, their breath drifting in pale clouds against the freezing air. These were brothers he'd trust with his life, men who'd ridden beside him through ambushes and blizzards that should have claimed them all. They knew today's ride wasn't about glory or vengeance. It was about making it through another brutal winter. Kuruk, his lifelong friend, and the warrior he trusted above all others, stepped up beside him without a sound. At 30, Kuruk carried a few more years, and a jagged scar that ran from his left eyebrow clear to his jaw, a souvenir from a grizzly that almost ended him 5 winters back. Broad and thick, where Bishan was lean and lightning fast, they balanced each other like blade and stone in fight or council. "The herd's drifting straight into the canyon, just like you figured," Kuruk murmured, his words puffing white in the chill. Bishan gave a slow nod, gaze never wavering from the valley below. The grim ranch sprawled across miles of what used to be prime Apache hunting country, one of the biggest cattle outfits in the whole New Mexico territory. Alvis Grim was the kind of man who seized whatever he wanted and figured his money and pull put him beyond any law or decency. In the last 5 years, his endless herds had trampled and fouled springs the Apache had depended on since time out of mind. His hired guns had cut down 2 of Bishan's kin, men who were only hunting deer on ground their grandfathers had walked long before any white boot ever touched it. Reservation agents dangled spoiled flour and rotten beef in exchange for chains, begging the people to trade freedom for a patch of dirt and a slow death. Bishan had watched other bands fade away on those God-forsaken reserves, the fire in their eyes snuffed out as they were forced to forget what made them Apache. He chose another road, one of endless watchfulness, constant movement, and the knowledge that tomorrow might never come. But freedom was worth every risk. "We ride when the sun hits the western ridges," Bishan said, voice low but carrying the weight of command. "We take only enough beef to see us through the cold months. No blood unless they draw first. Our target is the cattle, nothing else. Clear?" A low murmur of agreement rolled through the razor wind. They'd heard the same orders before every raid, and they knew Bishan never spoke them lightly. He wasn't a man who killed for sport or spite. He did what had to be done to keep his people breathing. Nothing more, nothing less. As the sun slid lower, brushing the snow with streaks of gold and blood red, Bishan felt the air change around him, a prickling instinct he'd learned to trust, a faint whisper from the spirits warning that this day would mark him forever. His fingers drifted to the small medicine pouch at his neck, brushing the worn leather like a man reaching for courage. "Brother?" Kuruk asked, catching the motion. "What's eating at you?" "I can't say," Bishan answered, eyes locked on the far valley. "But I feel it in my bones. After today, nothing stays the same." He had no way of knowing just how deeply that quiet premonition would prove true. Zerelda Vale had always found the winter social whirl in Santa Fe more exhausting than enjoyable. Endless dances and soirees where marriageable girls were trotted out like prize fillies at auction. But this season the whole performance struck her as downright intolerable. At 23, she hovered dangerously close to the dreaded label of spinster, according to territorial society's unforgiving clock, a fact her father never let her forget, bringing it up with growing irritation and heat. The trouble with Zerelda Vale was plain as day. She had zero desire to end up as some man's pretty trophy, no matter how fat his wallet or how deep his connections ran. Over the last 2 years, she'd turned down 5 marriage proposals, and each flat refusal sent her father's temper climbing higher, his face flushing darker with every no. Alvis Grim had clawed his way up from dirt-poor immigrant to one of the richest cattle barons in the territory, building his sprawling empire through iron will and cutthroat deals that left competitors bleeding. He figured his only daughter owed it to the family name to lock in their power with a smart match. Ideally to the Mitchell clan, who controlled the biggest silver strike around, or the Harringtons, whose money flowed clear to the banks of San Francisco. Instead, Zerelda buried herself in books her father called downright scandalous for a lady. Heavy tomes on philosophy, fiery political pamphlets, even dry scientific papers that made most men squirm. At supper tables, she voiced ideas that left his business partners shifting in their seats and clearing their throats. She demanded to ride out with the foreman, eyeballing the herds up close, firing off questions that made it plain she could run the whole outfit as sharp as any man. That very morning he'd lit into her, face turning that dangerous crimson that always signaled a storm coming. "You really think you can boss a ranch?" he'd barked. "You figure you know the cattle game better than men who've lived it their whole damn lives? You're a woman, Zerelda. Your job is to marry smart, keep a fine house, and look the part. Society don't ask for more, and it ain't asking too much." The fight boiled over until she couldn't stand another second of his iron-fisted rule. She stormed out, ordered the stable boys to saddle Tempest, and pointed the mare toward the northern ranges. Her father, still steaming, let her go. maybe hoping the bite of winter wind and a hard gallop would finally hammer some sense into her thick skull. Now, with the winter sun dipping low toward the western ridges, Zerelda rode deep into canyon country, bundled in a heavy wool coat trimmed with fox fur. Her golden hair was tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. She sat astride her favorite gray mare, Tempest, a high-spirited gift from her 16th birthday, surrounded by 4 of the ranch's toughest hands. Bodaway Flint, the grizzled ex-cavalry scout whose lined face carried decades of hard living in this unforgiving land. Bramwell Fox, the freedman who'd proven himself the finest rider in the territory. And the 2 young punchers, Eknath Rook, both itching to show they had grit. For the past hour, Bodaway had been urging her to turn back. "Miss Zerelda, daylight's bleeding out fast, and we're awful close to the high brakes," he said, hesitating like a man stepping on thin ice. "Truth is, ma'am, words come down about Apache sign in these parts. I ain't trying to scare you, but your pa would skin me alive if harm came your way." Zerelda knew he was right. The smart play was to rein Tempest around and hightail it home before full dark swallowed them. But the raw, stark beauty of the winter wilds had her in its grip, refusing to let go. The dying light hit the snow-blanketed peaks just right, washing them in soft rose and molten gold. A deep quiet hung everywhere, broken only by the low moan of wind through the pines and the rough croak of a raven now and then. Out here, the endless emptiness felt truer, more honest than the stuffy drawing rooms of Santa Fe society. Out here she could finally draw a full breath. Out here she didn't have to play the perfect daughter or the marriageable prize. Out here she felt alive, really alive, in a way that scared her as much as it thrilled her. "Just a few more minutes," she murmured, blue eyes drinking in the view. "It's so damn beautiful up here, so peaceful." The word peaceful still hung in the air when the sound hit them. Distant thunder of hooves, sharp yells of men, the raw chaos exploding in the valley below. "The herd!" Bramwell Fox shouted, hand flying to the rifle slung on his saddle. "Somebody's scattering 'em!" Bodaway yanked his own Winchester free, old eyes sweeping the ground below. "Apache raiders. Miss Zerelda, you ride hard for the house right now. We'll deal with this." But before she could answer, gunfire split the freezing air like shattering glass. Tempest reared high, eyes rolling white with terror, then bolted straight toward the madness instead of away. The ranch hands spurred after her, hollering for her to wheel back, but their voices drowned in the roar of wind, pounding hooves, and cracking shots. By rights, Zerelda should have been frozen with fear, every survival instinct screaming to turn and run. Yet some untamed spark inside her, the same wild streak that had always chafed against society's tight corset, pushed her forward instead. What unfolded below was nothing like the safe, polished world she'd known. Apache riders flowed like living shadows, their movements so precise and deadly graceful that raw chaos turned almost poetic. They herded the cattle toward the high passes with horsemanship that made her father's hired men look like stumbling greenhorns. The ranch guards blazed away in blind panic, bullets more likely to tag one another than hit anything useful. Then, through the twisting snow and drifting gun smoke, she saw him. He sat tall on a striking paint stallion, black and white hide sharp against the endless white. Even from afar he owned the scene. The easy way he fused with the horse like they shared one heartbeat. The subtle hand signals his men obeyed without question. The way he seemed woven into the wild land itself, not just riding through it. Their eyes locked across the battlefield. Time stretched thin, the world shrinking until nothing existed but those deep, obsidian eyes holding hers. Zerelda had always scoffed at the idea of love striking like lightning. Two souls locking eyes, and instantly knowing they belonged together. She'd read those flowery scenes in dime novels and rolled her eyes, calling them the daydreams of writers who'd never felt real heat or real want. Yet when those deep obsidian eyes met hers through the swirling snow and gun smoke, something cracked open inside her chest. It felt like her heart had spent 23 years waiting for exactly this second, like a hidden piece of her soul had finally spotted its missing half. Across the distance, the Apache warrior's eyes widened just a fraction. Even from afar, she caught the flicker on his face. Shock, then sharp recognition, and something softer, almost like awe. His look hardened in an instant, turning razor-focused. He dug his heels into the paint stallion's flanks and charged straight for her. Ice-cold panic surged through Zerelda's veins, shattering the strange trance that had pinned her in place. She yanked Tempest around hard and slapped the reins, sending the mare into a dead run across the rough, snow-blanketed ground. Her pulse hammered so fierce, she swore it would crack ribs. Behind her came the pounding thunder of pursuit. She could feel him gaining, closing the gap with terrifying speed. The snow hid slick ice and hidden ruts, turning every stride into a gamble. Tempest's hooves hit a buried frozen creek and slid out from under her. Zerelda pitched forward, slamming into the powder with a jolt that knocked the wind clean out of her. Stars exploded behind her eyes. Her rifle had spun free of its scabbard and landed just out of reach. She clawed toward it on hands and knees, gloved fingers numb from cold and shaking with raw fear. She was inches from the stock when a dark shadow loomed over her. Bishan swung down from his horse with a fluid grace that belied his size and power. He struck like a coiled rattler, Boot kicking the rifle aside before she could close her fingers around it, then dropping his weight to pin her flat against the snow. His hands clamped onto her shoulders, strong, unyielding, but careful not to bruise. He held her down without cruelty, simply keeping her there beneath him. Zerelda twisted and fought, breath coming in short, ragged bursts that had nothing to do with the struggle. Every inch where their bodies pressed together burned into her awareness. The solid heat of him above her, the fall of his long black hair curtaining them off from the world like a private storm. Up close, she could map every line of his face, the carved strength of his jaw, the high, proud cheekbones of his people, the bold sweep of his nose, the endless depths in those dark eyes she could drown in forever. He was beautiful. The word hit her like a slap. Not the polished handsome of Santa Fe suitors, but the raw, wild beauty of a mountain lion or a thunderstorm. Fierce, untamed, magnificent. They stared, chests heaving, breath mingling in white clouds between them in the freezing air. Snow drifted down soft around them, catching in her golden strands, clinging to his dark lashes, wrapping the moment in a fragile, impossible tenderness amid the gunfire and shouts. The raid's noise faded to a distant hum, as if the whole world had shrunk to just this breath-held space between them. Bishan looked down at the woman pinned beneath him and felt the ground shift under his entire life. She was more beautiful than dawn, breaking over the holy peaks, more beautiful than anything he'd ever dreamed. Her eyes shone summer sky blue, wide with fear, yet blazing with defiance, and something deeper, something that reached straight into his spirit, past reason, past words. Her hair spilled like molten gold from under her hat, framing a face from a soft, rich world that should have been alien to him forever. But it wasn't her looks that struck him like a war club to the ribs. It was the unquenchable fire in her gaze, the proud spirit that refused to break even now, trapped and helpless. The way she held his stare steady, no tears, no pleas, no surrender of her dignity, though she lay completely at his mercy. In that frozen heartbeat, Bishan knew, with a certainty that comes only once if you're lucky, that everything had changed. This golden-haired enemy was, against all odds, his fate. The truth scared him worse than any battlefield he'd ever ridden into. He felt her heart racing wild under his palms, saw the frantic pulse jumping at her throat. Her lips parted as she fought for air, and for one dangerous second he wondered how they would taste, what soft sounds she'd make if he shoved himself back fast, as if scorched. The sudden space between them hurt like a fresh wound, but he forced distance, forced himself to remember who he was, why he was here. Zerelda scrambled up, eyes never leaving his face. For a long, electric moment they simply stood there, the air between them crackling with a force neither could name, more lethal than lead or steel. Then she spun and ran. Bishan let her go. Every instinct roared at him to chase, to seize, to claim what his blood already knew was his. But he stayed rooted in the snow, watching her figure shrink toward the distant ranch lights, golden hair whipping behind her like a battle flag. Kuruk appeared at his side, scarred face tight with worry. "Brother, you hurt. Did she cut you?" "No," Bishan said quietly, gaze still locked on the horizon where she'd vanished. "But I'll never be the same again." "We need to ride. We've got the beef we came for, and those white men's guns are closing in." Bishan nodded slow, swung up onto his stallion, and led the razor wind back into the high country with 200 head in tow. One thought drummed through him steady as a heartbeat. She would be his, not by force, not by chains, but by something fiercer, something that shook him deeper than any enemy ever had. She would be his because the spirits had written it so. Because in that single shattering glance, he'd seen his whole future shining in the blue depths of her eyes. The Apache didn't put stock in the white man's notion of fate. They put their faith in liberty, in making their own choices, in the raw strength of a person's will to carve out their own trail through life. But Bishan couldn't shake what had hit him when he gazed into her eyes, when he'd held her down in the snow and felt her heart pounding fierce against his hand. She was his fate, plain and simple, and he'd wait days, months, years, if that's what it took, for the day she'd see it too. Zerelda barely recalled the frantic ride back to the ranch house. Bodaway Flint and the others finally caught up to her, their faces etched with worry melting into pure relief when they saw she was still in one piece. They'd lost close to 200 head in the Apache raid, yet by some miracle no one lay dead or bleeding bad. The raiders had melted into the high mountains like morning mist, their tracks already filling with fresh snow that would wipe them clean by dawn. Alvis Grim was in a towering rage when she stepped through the door, clothes torn and dusty, face ghost pale. He stalked the big parlor like a cornered grizzly, face swollen purple as he roared about filthy savages, lawless country, and that useless territorial governor too yellow to send real soldiers to crush the Apache once and for all. "This is exactly why I told you to stay clear of those northern ranges," he bellowed, slamming his fist onto the mahogany desk so hard the crystal decanter rattled and jumped. "Those red devils could have killed you or done worse. You got any notion what they do to white women they take?" Zerelda sank into the chair by the roaring fireplace, pulling the blanket a servant had draped over her shoulders tight around her. She said nothing. She could still feel the Apache warrior's strong hands gripping her shoulders, could still see the burning intensity in those dark eyes as he'd stared down at her. Her heart hadn't slowed since the second he'd let go and stepped away. What scared her deepest wasn't the capture itself. It was that in that frozen heartbeat before he released her, some wild, secret part of her hadn't wanted him to let go at all. "Zerelda, you hearing a word I'm saying?" She lifted her eyes to find her father glaring at her, exasperation thick in his voice, with maybe a flicker of worry, if Alvis Grim was even capable of such a thing. "I'm sorry, Father. What was that?" "I said I'm bringing in more guns," Hard men out of Texas who know how to handle Apache raiders. Men who won't blink when it's time to do what's got to be done." His eyes narrowed to slits. "And you, young lady, ain't setting foot near those northern pastures ever again. That clear enough?" She nodded like a puppet on strings, but his words slid right past her. Her mind was miles away, tangled in memories of dark eyes, iron hands, and a connection that laughed at every rule of sense and reason. That night, she lay in her tall four-poster bed under silk sheets and quilts stitched by hand, staring up at the fancy plaster ceiling, wide awake. His face kept flashing behind her eyes. That strange spark that had jumped between them refused to fade. It was pure insanity. He was Apache, her people's sworn enemy, a raider who'd just run off with her father's beef. By every right she should be shaking with terror, grateful he'd spared her, praying never to cross his path again. Yet all she could think about was what might have happened if that moment in the snow had stretched just a little longer. 3 weeks dragged by, and Zerelda felt herself slipping toward madness. Winter clamped down harder, storms rolling in that turned every trail into a death trap and locked folks inside their walls. She'd always loved winter. The soft hush of new snow, the warm crackle of fires, hot cocoa steaming in a cup. The perfect excuse to lose herself in a good book for hours. But this year, the season clawed at her. She snapped at the servants over nothing, picked fights with her father about every little thing and nothing at all, couldn't stick with even her favorite novels longer than a page or two. She blamed it on cabin fever, the natural itch that came from being cooped up during the worst weather. She wouldn't admit the real truth. She spent every spare minute staring at the horizon, searching for something she couldn't name, hoping for a glimpse she was too afraid to confess even to herself. True to his word, her father had brought in the extra guns. Rough-looking men rode in from Texas and Arizona, hard-eyed types who wore their Colts slung low, talked low and mean, and moved like predators. They rode the ranch lines with cold precision, rigged deadfalls in the mountain passes, and joked about wiping out Apache like they were talking about poisoning rats. Their presence turned Zerelda's stomach. She'd been raised to see the Apache as brutal savages, barely human, violent by nature, too stubborn to grab the gifts of civilization. But she'd looked straight into their leader's eyes, and what stared back wasn't savagery. It was sharp intelligence, fierce pride, deep honor, and something more, something that woke a hidden corner of her soul she'd never known was there. When a brutal storm finally broke and the sky cleared, Zerelda couldn't take another day locked inside. Before first light, she dressed in her heaviest riding gear, slipped past the servants, saddled Tempest herself, and rode out into the pale gray dawn, following a faint trail up toward the high country. She told herself she just needed the open air, the freedom of the land after weeks penned up. She refused to own the truth. She was hunting for him. By mid-morning the sun stood higher when she reached a wide clearing ringed by towering pines, their branches bowed heavy with snow. The ground lay untouched, except for the light prints of deer and rabbits. Zerelda swung down, walked to the tree line, and drew in deep breaths of the sharp, clean cold. For the first time in weeks, something tight in her chest eased. "You shouldn't be out here by yourself." She spun so fast she nearly stumbled, heart slamming into her throat hard enough to make her head swim. He stood silent at the edge of the pines, still as the trees themselves, looking like he'd stepped straight out of her restless dreams. Buckskin and thick fur wrapped him against the chill, his long black hair loose and stirring in the faint breeze. His long black hair hung loose, spilling over his shoulders and down his back in a dark wave that caught the pale morning sun like polished obsidian. In that crisp winter light, he looked like a figure stepped out of an old legend, too striking to be flesh and blood, too fierce and free to belong in her safe, buttoned-up world. Zerelda's gut reaction was to bolt, spring onto Tempest's back and fly toward the ranch's safety. But her boots stayed planted in the snow, and her eyes wouldn't tear away from his face. "I could say the same about you," she managed, amazed at how level her voice stayed, even as her heart slammed against her ribs like a trapped bird. "This is Grimland." A spark that might have been amusement softened the hard edges of his features for a heartbeat. "This ground was my people's long before any Grim ever set foot on it. We don't bow to your fences or your paper claims." He stepped nearer, moving so quietly she couldn't hear a single crunch of snow in the dead, still clearing. Her hand twitched toward the little derringer tucked in her coat pocket, but she didn't pull it. Some deep instinct whispered the gun would be useless. He'd close the gap and take it before her finger even found the trigger. "You gonna kill me?" she asked, hating the small shake in her voice on that last word. He stopped a couple paces away, close enough now for her to see the cold flush warming his bronze skin, the tiny gold flecks she'd missed in those dark eyes the first time, the faint laugh lines at the corners that hinted he smiled more than his solemn face let on. "If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have ridden away from that valley 3 weeks back," he said low, his voice rougher and deeper than memory, sending a shiver racing down her spine that had nothing to do with the chill. "I didn't come to hurt you." "Then why are you here?" The words hung heavy between them, loaded with questions neither wanted to face head on. His gaze never wavered from her face. Heat climbed into Zerelda's cheeks, despite the biting cold. "I've been watching the horizon every sunrise since that day," he said at last, voice low and thick with feeling, making her breath hitch. "Hoping you'd ride out again, hoping for one more look at your face. When I saw you slip away from the ranch this morning, I followed. I shouldn't have. It goes against every smart thing I know, but I couldn't hold back." Zerelda's throat tightened. No man had ever spoken to her with such bare, unguarded truth. The Santa Fe gentleman hid behind fancy words and rehearsed charm, never letting anything real show through the shine. "You've been watching me," she whispered. "Yes." No excuses, no softening the edges, just plain truth laid bare. "Why?" He took one more step, close enough now that she caught the scent of pine smoke, worn leather, and something clean and wild she couldn't name. "Because the second I looked into your eyes, you've been in my head every waking minute," he said, each word deliberate and heavy. "Because your face is the last thing I see when I shut my eyes at night. Because I've never put faith in the white man's God or stars spelling out destiny. But when I held you in the snow, I knew you were meant to be in my life. Meeting you changed something deep inside me that can't be undone." Tears stung the corners of Zerelda's eyes, emotions crashing over her she didn't have words for. She ought to be terrified. She ought to be spitting mad at his boldness. Instead, something buried deep inside her answered back, reaching toward him like a plant stretching for sunlight. "This can't happen," she said, voice cracking. "You know it can't. There's no way we—" "I know," he answered softly. "Your father would put a bullet in me if he knew I was this close. His guns are itching for any reason to hunt my people down." "I know. Our peoples have been at each other's throats for generations, centuries of blood and bad blood between us." "I know. Then why are we standing here acting like any of this could be real, like there could ever be a future where—" Her words trailed into silence, too big to finish. He lifted a hand slowly, giving her every chance to step back, to slap it away. When she stayed frozen, breath shallow, eyes locked on his, he brushed his fingers along her cheek. Rough, calloused from hard years, yet the touch was so gentle it nearly broke her. "Because some things outweigh war," he murmured, thumb tracing her cheekbone with aching care. Outweigh hate, outweigh every cold, hard reason this should never be, because I looked in your eyes and saw my whole tomorrow laid out plain. Now I can't unsee it. Can't go back to the man I was before you existed. Zerelda closed her eyes and leaned into his hand, ignoring every screaming voice in her head telling her to run. When she opened them again, he was watching her with a look that squeezed her heart, raw longing mixed with tenderness and a shadow of pain. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Bishan. It means one who runs swift." His gaze held hers steady. "And you're Zerelda. I heard your men calling for you that day in the valley." Zerelda repeated the name softly, letting the strange, strong syllables roll over her tongue. They felt beautiful in a way she couldn't quite explain. "We shouldn't be here like this. It's dangerous, for both of us." "Yes, it is," Bishan agreed quietly. "You should head back before anyone notices you're gone." "You're right, I should." But neither of them budged. They stood rooted in the wide clearing as the sun rose higher, sending bright winter light slanting through the tall pines. Golden beams and long blue shadows danced across the snow, turning the ground into a living quilt of light and dark. The rest of the world shrank away until there was only the two of them, caught in a fragile pocket of time where nothing else mattered. No consequences, no tomorrow. "Will I see you again?" Zerelda asked, hating how raw and needy the words sounded, how desperately she wanted him to say yes. Bishan's thumb traced one last slow path along her cheekbone before his hand dropped away. She could see the effort it cost him in the tight lines around his eyes. "Do you want to?" "I don't know what I want," she admitted, voice rough with honesty. "All I know is I haven't stopped thinking about you since that day in the snow. I've been scanning the horizon without even admitting it to myself. Standing here with you feels truer, more right than anything else in my whole life. And that scares me more than anything ever has." "Then we're the same," Bishan said, his voice warm and low, full of understanding that made her chest ache. "Because you've become the center of my world, and I can't tell anymore whether that's a blessing or a curse." "Maybe it's both," she whispered, managing a small, trembling smile. "I think you're right. It's definitely both." Bishan smiled then, a real one, wide and unguarded. It changed his whole face, melting the hard edges, making him look suddenly younger and somehow even more dangerously beautiful. "You're probably right about that." They talked for hours, standing in that quiet clearing like they had all the time in the world. Zerelda learned that Bishan had never wanted the warrior's life. As a boy, he'd dreamed of being a healer, studying roots, leaves, and the ways of animals alongside his grandmother, who knew the old plant medicines by heart. But war had claimed him instead. When he was 16, soldiers killed his father, and the weight of protecting his people fell on his shoulders because there was no one else strong enough to carry it. She told him about her own mother, lost when she was 12, leaving her alone in a house full of men who expected her to be pretty and quiet. She spoke of the books she hid under her bed, the dreams she once had of a bigger life, dreams society told her were impossible for a woman. She told him about the constant feeling of being trapped in a cage, even if the bars were made of silk and gold. "You're like a wild Mustang," Bishan said, studying her face with an intensity that stripped her bare. "Beautiful, full of fire, but penned in a corral that's way too small for your spirit. You were born to run free." Zerelda laughed, though it came out half like a sob. "That's exactly what I am, a wild horse in a gilded stall. Wild horses were never meant to be fenced," he said gently. "They're meant to feel the wind in their mane, the earth under their hooves, to choose their own trail instead of having it picked for them." "And what about you?" she asked, searching his face. "Are you free?" Bishan's gaze drifted past the clearing, distant and thoughtful. I'm free in ways your people will never understand. But I'm also bound, by duty, by the lives that depend on every choice I make. True freedom. I don't know if it exists for anyone. We're all tied to something. Responsibility, love, honor, survival. When Zerelda finally swung up onto Tempest to head back to the ranch, Bishan caught her gloved hand in his. His fingers were warm, despite the cold. "Will you meet me here again?" he asked, looking up at her with raw hope and quiet vulnerability. "Tomorrow," she answered, "when the sun's at its highest." She knew she should refuse. Every second spent with him was a betrayal of her father, her people, everything she'd been raised to believe. But when she looked into his eyes, all those reasons felt faint and far away, drowned out by something far stronger. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll be here." His smile broke across his face like sunlight cutting through storm clouds. He lifted her gloved hand to his lips, the unexpected tenderness of the gesture bringing fresh tears to her eyes. Then he let go. Zerelda rode back to the ranch in a daze, thoughts spinning wild. She was falling in love with a man who should have been her enemy. She was risking everything for stolen moments in hidden places, and she couldn't make herself care about the danger, the impossibility, any of it. For the first time in her life, she was choosing her own road, and that road led straight to Bishan. Over the next 2 weeks, Zerelda and Bishan met in secret nearly every day, always in a different place to stay hidden. Sometimes in the pine-ringed clearing where they first spoke, sometimes in a sheltered canyon where a hot spring kept the air warm, even in deepest winter. Once beside a frozen waterfall that glittered like 1,000 diamonds in the pale sunlight, the ice so beautiful it stole her breath. They talked about everything and nothing at all. Bishan taught her words in his language, chuckling softly at her clumsy attempts, but never once making her feel foolish. She read him passages from her favorite books, watching his face light up as he listened. Really listened, asking questions that showed he grasped not just the words, but the ideas underneath. They drank in each other's stories with a hunger that spoke of souls starved for real connection. Zerelda told him about growing up wrapped in wealth, yet feeling completely alone, about the endless pressure to be someone she wasn't, about the dreams she'd buried because she'd been told they were impossible for a girl like her. Bishan shared memories of his boyhood in the mountains, learning to track deer beside his father, the quiet hours spent with his grandmother gathering herbs, the day everything changed when soldiers took his father and the weight of leadership fell on his 16-year-old shoulders. The grandmother who had shown him the secrets of roots and remedies, the quiet lessons in healing that once lit up his boyhood dreams. Then came the day soldiers took his father, and the path of a warrior was forced on him. No choice, no turning back. With every stolen meeting, the pull between them grew fiercer, sparking like dry grass under a summer storm. It lived in the glances that lingered one heartbeat too long, in the brush of fingers that sent fire racing along their skin, in the heavy silences when their eyes locked and the world simply stopped. Yet Bishan never pressed, never asked for more than she was willing to offer. He treated her with a steady respect and quiet gentleness that drew her deeper into love with every passing hour, every shared breath, every moment side by side. One bitter afternoon, they sat close by a small fire he'd built to fight the cutting cold. Zerelda noticed the pale scars crisscrossing his hands, old marks faded to white against his bronze skin. She reached out, tracing one gently with her fingertip, stunned at how such a light touch could set her pulse thundering. Bishan glanced down at their linked hands, his thumb moving absently over her knuckles. Long winters back, when I was young and full of fire, maybe 14, 15, I took on a mountain lion stalking our camp, going after the little ones. I won. Barely. These scars remind me courage and foolishness wear the same face most days. Only the ending tells them apart. Zerelda smiled, despite the ache in her chest. You're not foolish. Brave, maybe reckless, but never foolish. He lifted an eyebrow, a flicker of humor warming his dark eyes. Then what do you call a man who gambles everything? His life, his people's safety, his own future, for time with a woman he can never truly keep? A woman whose world and his were never meant to touch? The words landed heavy, yanking them both back to the hard truth they'd been dodging. Zerelda's smile faded as the weight of their impossible situation crashed over her again. Bishan, she whispered, voice thick. What in the world are we doing? Where can this possibly go? We're chasing a dream, but dreams don't last. Sooner or later we wake up. He turned fully to her, eyes burning in the firelight, hands rising to cradle her face with a tenderness that nearly undid her. I don't have the answers, he admitted, voice rough with feeling. I only know that when I'm with you, I feel complete in a way I never have before. You make me want to believe there could be a tomorrow where our peoples aren't at war, where love is strong enough to cross any river of blood, where we could build something real instead of being ripped apart by things bigger than us. But love isn't enough, Zerelda said, tears spilling freely now, sliding hot down her cheeks. Not in this world, Bishan. My father would never accept you. Your people would never accept me. The laws, the hate, centuries of killing between us. How can love stand against all that? His thumbs swept away her tears with reverent care, as though she were fragile glass that might shatter under rough handling. Then maybe we have to make our own world, he murmured. One with room for both of us, where the old poisons can't reach. How? She asked, voice breaking. Where could we even go? I don't have every answer, he said, frustration and pain threading through his words, the pain of a leader who fixed problems for others but couldn't fix this one. But I know I'd rather die free beside you than live without you. If you asked me to walk away from my people, from everything I've ever known, I'd do it, Zerelda. For you I'd do anything, go anywhere, become anyone. Her heart cracked wide open at the raw truth in his voice, the naked vulnerability he laid bare. I can't ask that of you, she whispered. Your people need you. You're their leader, their shield. I can't be the reason you turn your back on them. You don't have to ask, Bishan said. He leaned in, resting his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling warm in the cold space between them. I give it freely, with my whole heart. A man can't lead when his heart is split in two. Without you, I'd be empty, broken, and a broken man helps no one. Then she kissed him. Couldn't hold back another second. She poured everything into it, every unspoken feeling, every fear, every wild hope she couldn't name. It was her first real kiss, and it was perfect, soft and fierce, desperate and gentle, full of promise and the sharp edge of heartbreak all at once. Bishan answered with a hunger that matched hers, arms wrapping tight around her, pulling her close until no space remained. He kissed her like a man who'd crossed a desert and finally found water, like she was the breath he needed to live, everything he'd ever wanted and never dared believe he could have. When they finally parted, both gasping, Zerelda felt her whole body ablaze despite the winter freeze. She'd never imagined a kiss could do this, make her feel weightless and burning, drowning and flying all at once. Make her crave things she had no words for, need things she'd never let herself imagine. Good Lord, she breathed, eyes wide with wonder, fingers pressed to her lips as if she could trap the feeling there forever. Bishan laughed, low, rich, full of deep male satisfaction. Is that a good thing? I don't know, she admitted, heart still racing, body trembling from head to toe. I've never felt anything like it. It's overwhelming, almost scary how strong it is. His face grew serious, tender. "Do you want more?" She looked into his eyes and saw her own longing mirrored back, saw the iron control it took him to hold back, to let her lead. "Yes," she whispered, the word rising from some newly awakened place inside her. "I want more. I want everything." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Zerelda gave herself over completely. In his arms, the impossible felt within reach. In his arms, she could almost believe love might truly conquer anything. In his arms, she was free, truly, deeply, wildly free, for the first time in her life. But she had always known their stolen time couldn't last forever. From the start, Zerelda had understood the danger, yet she'd let herself hope they could stretch these secret moments out indefinitely. She'd been careful, or so she thought, mixing up her ride times, never staying away too long, always coming back with believable excuses about scouting new trails or checking distant fences. But she'd badly underestimated two things: her father's web of spies and the sharp-eyed suspicion of the hired guns who patrolled the ranch edges like wolves on the hunt. One of them, a lean, hard-faced man named Quill Vex, with eyes as cold and flat as a rattlesnake's, had trailed her to one of their meetings. Hidden in the brush, he'd watched it all. The desperate kisses, the tender way they clung to each other, the quiet words of love that would have been called treason by both sides. Quill rode straight back and laid it all out for Alvis Grim, barely hiding his cruel satisfaction at delivering such devastating news. Zerelda was in the stables the next afternoon, brushing Tempest's coat and daydreaming about Bishan's promise to meet her tomorrow, when her father burst in with Quill Vex and 3 more hard cases right behind him. The raw fury twisting Alvis Grim's face turned her blood to ice. "How could you?" he roared, voice booming through the stable until the horses shifted and snorted in their stalls. "How could you turn your back on your own kind like this? How could you throw away everything I've built? Everything I bled for? Everything your mother and I gave up to hand you this life?" Zerelda's stomach plummeted, but she kept her voice level as she turned slowly to face him. "I don't know what you're talking about, Father. Don't you lie to me." He lunged forward and seized her arm in a bruising grip, fingers digging deep enough to leave marks that would linger for days. "Quill saw you with that Apache buck, saw you kissing him like some back-alley soiled dove in Santa Fe." Zerelda jerked her arm free, years of bottled-up anger surging hot and sudden. "He's no savage. His name is Bishan, and he's more of a gentleman, more decent, than any man you've ever tried to shove me toward." Her father's open hand cracked across her face, hard enough to snap her head sideways and split her lip. Blood bloomed on her tongue, coppery and sharp, but she refused to cry, refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. "You'll never lay eyes on him again," Alvis snarled, voice shaking with rage so thick it seemed to heat the air around him. "You'll stay locked in this house under guard until I can arrange a marriage to salvage whatever's left of your name, if that's even possible now." He swung toward Quill Vex, eyes glittering with pure venom. "And as for your Apache lover, I want him dead. I want his whole band wiped out. $5,000 cash to the man who brings me his scalp as proof." "No!" Zerelda lunged at her father, but the hired guns grabbed her arms, pinning her back as she fought against their iron hold. "Please, Father, please don't do this. I'll do whatever you say. I'll marry whoever you pick. Just don't hurt him. Please." Alvis stared at her with disgust so deep it hit like a physical blow. "Pathetic. Degrading yourself for a filthy redskin. Your mother would be ashamed to see what you've turned into." He stormed out, leaving her there sobbing in the rough grip of the hired guns. They dragged her back to the main house and shoved her into her room, slamming the heavy oak door and turning the new lock with a final, solid click. Zerelda threw herself against the door, pounding and screaming until her throat went raw and her fists bruised. But the thick wood didn't budge. No one was coming to help. She had to warn Bishan. She had to get word to him that her father had placed a bounty on his head. Professional killers would be riding out soon, hunting him and his people. But iron bars now crossed the windows, installed while she'd been in the stables. Her father had planned this trap down to the last detail. Guards stood watch in the hallway, making escape impossible. She paced the room like a trapped animal, mind racing through desperate plans, prying the bars, rushing the guards despite their guns, setting her own room ablaze for a distraction. Every idea sounded hopeless, and with each passing hour, her panic sharpened into something unbearable. The next day crawled by in slow agony. Bishan would have waited at their spot, wondering why she hadn't come. Would he think she'd turned away? Would he ride closer to the ranch to check on her, riding straight into her father's ambush? The thought of him hunted down, killed, twisted her stomach so hard she couldn't eat the trays the servants brought, couldn't sleep despite bone-deep exhaustion. She just paced, planned, and prayed to whatever powers might listen to keep him safe. On the third night of her imprisonment, help arrived from the unlikeliest place. In the dead quiet of the house, when even the guards were nodding off, Zerelda heard a soft tap at her window. Heart pounding, she rushed over and saw Bramwell Fox outside, the freedman from the stables who'd always shown her kindness, now risking his own life and freedom by climbing a rope to her second-story window in the dark. "Miss Zerelda," he whispered urgently, face tight with worry and resolve. "I can't bust you out. Too many guards, and those bars are solid iron. But if you tell me where to find him, I can get a message through." Relief and gratitude nearly brought her to her knees. With trembling hands, she tore a page from one of her books, scribbled everything: her father's fury, the bounty on Bishan's head, the hired killers coming for him, and the razor wind. She begged him to run, to take his people and vanish deep into the mountains where no white man could follow. Bramwell took the note, eyes steady. "I'll get it to him. Stay strong, miss." Then he was gone into the night, leaving Zerelda to wait in the dark, heart hammering with fragile hope. She begged him to take his people and vanish deep into the high country, where Alvis Grim's men couldn't track them, where the rugged peaks themselves would shield him and keep him alive. "Thank you," she whispered to Bramwell Fox, pressing the folded note into his calloused hands, tears cutting tracks down her cheeks. "You're putting everything on the line for this. If my father finds out—" Bramwell gave her a sad, knowing smile, compassion shining in his dark eyes. "I know what it's like to love someone the world says is off limits, Miss Zerelda. I had a wife once, back before freedom came. Her master sold her down south, and I never saw her face again. If I can help keep your love breathing, maybe some good comes out of my own hurt." True to his promise, Bramwell slipped away before first light. Using his sharp tracking eye and quiet questions asked in the right ears, he located Bishan's camp. He handed over the note and melted back toward the ranch before anyone marked his absence. Bishan unfolded Zerelda's words by firelight, fury and helpless rage building inside him like a storm ready to break. She was locked away in her own home. Her father had slapped a fat bounty on his head. Paid killers were already riding out, hell-bent on putting lead in him and every soul he swore to protect. The razor wind gathered close, faces hard and grim as he read the letter aloud. Kuruk spoke first, scarred features set like stone. "We ride out now. Take the band deeper into the mountains where white men can't follow. The land itself will guard us. It's the only smart play, brother. The only one that keeps our people breathing." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Already men were talking hidden trails, secret canyons, ways to vanish into country they knew better than their own heartbeats. But Bishan stood silent, staring at Zerelda's handwriting, at the smudged tear stains blurring the ink, at her desperate plea for him to save himself. Deep down, he knew logic screamed one thing, but his soul refused. "I'm going after her," he said, voice slicing clean through the talk like a knife through rawhide. Silence dropped heavy. The warriors stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Kuruk stepped forward slow, careful, the way you approach a wounded bear. "That's suicide, brother. Pure suicide. They'll be waiting for exactly this move. It's a trap with you as the bait. They'll drop you before you're within 100 yards of that house." "Then I'll walk into the trap and take her out anyway," Bishan answered, calm as still water, though his fists were clenched, white-knuckled at his sides. "You'll die." Kuruk gripped his shoulders, eyes wild with fear. "You'll die, for what? A woman you can't ever have? A love with no tomorrow? What happens to our people when you're gone, brother? Who keeps them safe? Who do they trust when you're cold in the ground?" The question hung thick, heavy with duty and sacrifice. Bishan stayed quiet a long beat, feeling the old pull of responsibility tearing against the fierce demand of his heart. He'd poured his whole life into his people, given up youth, dreams, everything, for their survival and freedom. But Zerelda wasn't just a woman he loved. She was his heartbeat, his breath, the reason he still woke at dawn. "I've given my life to our people," he said at last, voice steady even as everything inside him churned. "Sacrificed my youth, my hopes, my own wants. But Zerelda is my heart, and a man can't live without his heart. If I leave her trapped now, suffering because she dared to love me, I'll be hollow, broken, and a broken man is useless to anyone, especially those who count on him." He looked around at the razor wind, the faces of men who'd ridden with him through hell, trusted him when every sign said run. "I'm not ordering any of you to come. This is my call, my risk. But if any of you believe in love, if any of you know what it means to find the other half of your soul, ride with me. Help me bring her home." Silence stretched tight as a drawn bow. Bishan braced himself for the truth. He might ride alone. Then Kuruk stepped up, reluctant grin cracking his scarred face. "You're a damn fool, brother, a complete idiot, but you're my brother, and I won't let you die by yourself. I'm in." One by one the others moved forward. Not every man. Some had wives, children, ties too heavy to break for what looked like certain death. But 8, Kuruk among them, pledged themselves to Bishan's desperate cause, ready to gamble everything for his love. Together they mapped the impossible. 5 nights later, under a moonless sky black enough to hide even a hawk's shadow, the rescue began. Bishan and his chosen men ghosted towards the Grim ranch, with the silent patience that had earned the Apache both dread and respect across the territory. They flowed like smoke, dodging patrols, memorizing the house's weak points, hunting any crack in what should have been an iron defense. Bramwell Fox had given them gold. Which room held Zerelda, guard shifts, patrol paths, best approach and escape routes. Even with that edge, the odds were brutal, but Bishan had beaten long odds before. He climbed the wall to her window alone, heart hammering harder than from the effort. When he tapped the glass soft, her face appeared in the dark. Even through the iron bars he saw despair shatter into pure, radiant hope, lighting her features like dawn breaking. She pressed her palm to the glass, eyes shining with tears and fierce joy. Bishan gave her a single nod. "Stay quiet, stay strong," then set to work prying the bars with steady, silent hands. She tried to speak, words tumbling out in a rush of relief, but Bishan pressed a finger gently to her lips. Quiet. Guards patrolled close. One wrong sound could bring the whole ranch down on them. "Stand back," he breathed, voice so low it barely stirred the air in the dead of night stillness. He drew his knife and went to work on the bars, easing the blade into the old mortar, chipping away with careful, measured pressure. Years of freeze and thaw had weakened the hold, but every scrape of steel on stone rang loud in his ears like a gunshot. 15 minutes dragged by. 20. Sweat rolled down his back despite the biting cold, muscles burning from the awkward angle and endless strain. But at last the final chunk gave way. The bars came loose. Bishan slid through the narrow opening and was instantly wrapped in Zerelda's arms. She clung to him, trembling hard, tears soaking into his buckskin shirt as she buried her face against his chest. "I thought I'd never see you again," she sobbed, voice muffled to keep from carrying. "I thought my father would kill you, that I'd be locked in here forever, that everything we had would fade into some cruel dream while I lived a nightmare. I told you I'd tear down worlds to keep you safe," Bishan whispered into her hair, drawing in her scent, feeling the jagged pieces of himself snap back into place for the first time since he'd read her desperate note. "Did you think I was just talking big?" Zerelda laughed through her tears, a bright, broken sound of pure joy. "You came for me. You actually came." "Always," he promised, easing back just enough to meet her eyes. "Now we move. Fast and quiet. Can you do that?" She nodded, jaw set with fierce determination even through the fear. Bishan helped her over the sill and down the rope he'd tied off, his hands steady despite the terror clawing at his gut that their luck could snap any second. The razor wind waited below in the shadows, eyes sweeping the darkness for any flicker of movement. When Zerelda's boots hit ground, Bishan took her hand and they slipped toward the property line, moving swift and silent as deer. They were almost to the tree line, almost to cover, when a shout ripped the night behind them. "There! They're breaking out! Sound the alarm!" Gunshots exploded like thunderclaps. The whole ranch woke in an instant, lamps flaring in windows, men yelling and boots pounding, horses nickering as they were saddled fast, dogs baying wild. The careful, ghost-quiet plan had just turned into a flat-out run for their lives. "Go!" Bishan roared to his men. "Get to the horses, get her clear." But Zerelda wouldn't let go, her fingers locked tight around his with desperate strength. They ran together through the black night, bullets singing past like angry wasps, shouts growing louder, closer, pursuit closing fast. Bishan's paint stallion waited at the preset spot. He swung Zerelda up in front of him, vaulted behind her, and drove his heels hard. The horse exploded into a full gallop. Behind them came the thunder of ranch horses giving chase. But Bishan knew these mountains like his own scars. Narrow cuts barely wide enough for one rider, frozen creeks that swallowed tracks, ground so rough no white man would dare follow after dark. They rode hard through the night, never slowing, putting mile after mile between them and the ranch. The pursuit clung for a while, then fell back. Grim's men unwilling to risk broken necks or worse in the treacherous high passes by starlight. When dawn finally broke, brushing the snow-capped peaks with soft rose and gold, they reached Bishan's high camp. Zerelda was spent, hands raw from clutching the saddle, body bruised and aching from the brutal ride and the terror of escape. But she was free. She was with Bishan. Nothing else mattered. The rest of the band met them with a mix of raw relief and wary caution. Zerelda felt their eyes on her, not outright hostile, but heavy with doubt. She was the daughter of their worst enemy, a woman from the people bent on wiping them out. Her being here could drag death right to their fires. Bishan faced them with calm command, arm firm around Zerelda's shoulders, protective, possessive, unyielding. "This is Zerelda," he said simply, voice carrying to every man and woman gathered. "She's under my protection. She walked away from her world for me, risked everything for what we have. Anyone who wants to challenge that, anyone who doubts my call, speak now." Silence fell, thick but thoughtful. Not angry. Finally Kuruk stepped forward, offering Zerelda a small, respectful nod. His scarred face softened with something close to admiration. "You're welcome here," he said in careful, measured English. "Any woman with the guts to throw it all away for love earns our respect and our shield. You're one of us now." Tears stung Zerelda's eyes again. The walls she'd spent years building were crumbling fast in the face of real feeling. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick. Bishan guided her to his shelter, a sturdy lean-to tucked against the mountain rock, warm and surprisingly comfortable for something so simple. He built the fire high until heat filled the space, then wrapped her in thick furs and checked her over gently, hands searching for hurts. "You hurt anywhere?" he asked, voice soft as he moved over her arms, her back. "Just bruises," she assured him, though her lip was still puffy from her father's blow, and dark marks bloomed on her arms where the hired guns had gripped too hard. "Nothing that won't heal. Or, nothing that won't mend," Zerelda assured him, though her lip was still swollen and tender from her father's blow, and dark bruises shadowed her arms where the hired guns had gripped too hard. Bishan traced the split in her lip with the lightest touch, his jaw clenching tight as fresh rage flared in his eyes at the proof of Alvis Grim's cruelty. "I ought to ride back and put a bullet in him for laying hands on you like that," he growled low. "No," Zerelda said firmly, catching his hand and pressing it to her cheek. "Enough blood's been spilled because of me already. I won't have you turn killer on my account. I just want to stay right here with you. I want us to figure out how to build something real together." Bishan drew her close, and they settled in front of the fire, wrapped around each other as if letting go might break them apart forever, as if holding tight enough could make them one unbreakable whole. "What happens next?" Zerelda asked quietly, voice muffled against his chest. "I don't know," Bishan admitted, fingers threading gently through her hair in absent, soothing strokes. "Your father won't quit hunting you. He'll throw every dollar and every favor he's got at this. He'll bring in every gunfighter in the territory, if that's what it takes." He paused, choosing his words with care. "My people let you stay tonight because I gave them no other choice, because they trust my judgment. But they're scared, Zerelda. Scared I'm putting love ahead of their lives. Scared your being here will pull your father's wrath down on every last one of us." "Are you?" she asked softly. "Putting love before their safety?" He went quiet for a long stretch, his chest rising and falling steady beneath her cheek. "Maybe," he said at last. "But I have to believe there's a way we can make it work together. A way our peoples can find peace instead of more killing. Maybe we can be the start of that. Maybe what we have is the first step toward something different." Zerelda wanted so badly to believe him. She wanted their love to be strong enough to heal old wounds, to span the deep chasm between their worlds. But she'd seen the hate burning in her father's eyes, watched the casual brutality of his hired men, heard the endless stories of broken promises and massacred villages stretching back generations. Still, curled in Bishan's arms, watching the firelight play across the shelter walls and feeling safer than she ever had in her father's grand ranch house, she let herself hope. If love couldn't remake the whole world, maybe it could carve out one small, hidden corner where they could simply exist. Together, winter tightened its grip, but Zerelda hardly minded the bone-deep cold when Bishan was near. Camp life was rougher than anything her sheltered upbringing had prepared her for. No servants fetching meals, no feather beds, no trace of luxury. She learned to cook over open flames, to mend clothes with bone needles and sinew, to tackle every chore she'd once thought beneath her. The Apache women watched her at first with deep suspicion, and she couldn't fault them. She was the daughter of the man who'd stolen their land and spilled their blood. She carried the weight of everything they had reason to despise. But as the days passed, and they saw her pitch in without complaint, watched her learn their ways with honest effort, saw the real love she held for Bishan, they began to soften. An older woman named Goyon, face etched with decades of hard living, yet eyes warm with kindness, took Zerelda under her wing. Goyon taught her Apache words with patient repetition, showed her the old customs and the hard-won tricks for surviving this unforgiving land, shared tales of the time before white men flooded in like a rising river. Bishan watched Zerelda's quiet transformation with a fierce mix of pride and love that sometimes hurt to feel. She was like a flower that had spent too long in a cramped pot, roots cramped and bound. Now, with space to stretch and breathe, she was finally blooming, laughing more freely, smiling wider, shedding the heavy weight of expectations and rules that had pressed on her all her life. Yet the shadow of her father still hung over them like a thunderhead waiting to break. Alvis Grim had doubled the bounty on Bishan's head to a staggering amount and tacked on a fat reward for any word of Zerelda's whereabouts. Bounty hunters and hired killers combed the mountains with grim purpose, making every hunt, every move riskier for the Apache. One night, lying safe in Bishan's arms inside the warm shelter, Zerelda finally asked the question that had haunted her for weeks. "Will we ever stop running?" she murmured. "Will there ever come a day when we're not always looking over our shoulders, waiting for my father's men to catch up?" Bishan stroked her hair thoughtfully, fingers gentle against her scalp. "Not here in this territory," he said plainly. "Your father's reach stretches too far, his need for revenge burns too hot, his money runs too deep. Sooner or later he'll find us." He left the rest unspoken. He didn't need to. "Then what do we do?" Zerelda asked, fighting to keep the fear from cracking her voice. "We go north," Bishan answered simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Into lands where the white man's law hasn't stretched its long fingers yet, where we can build a life without always watching the horizon, without wondering if every sunrise is our last." Zerelda sat up, searching his face in the flickering firelight. "What about your people? You're their leader, Bishan. They depend on you to keep them alive." "I've talked with the Ember Elders," he said, expression grave. "Some will ride with us, the ones tired of endless fighting, the ones hungry for a place to live in peace. Others will stay, find their own trail. Kuruk has agreed to lead those who remain. He's wise, strong, a better chief than I ever was in some ways. They'll be safe under his watch." "You'd really give up everything for me?" The words slipped out in a hushed breath, almost too fragile to speak aloud. Bishan cradled her face in both hands, eyes blazing with a love so fierce it stole the air from her lungs. "You're not dragging me away from my life, Zerelda. You're handing me a new one, a better one. With you I can finally picture a tomorrow that isn't soaked in blood and endless fighting. With you I can dream of kids growing up without the shadow of terror hanging over every day. You're not a weight on my shoulders. You're my way out of the dark." Tears poured down Zerelda's cheeks. Emotion choked her throat so tight she couldn't speak. Instead, she surged forward and kissed him, pouring gratitude, longing, devotion, and fragile hope into every press of her lips. That night they came together for the first time, passion wrapped in the gentlest tenderness, need so strong it burned away every doubt and fear. Zerelda had never known closeness could feel like this. Two people melting so completely into one another, body and soul woven tight. In Bishan's arms she felt whole for the first time, as though she'd spent her whole life missing a vital piece, and had finally found it. Afterward, tangled together beneath the heavy furs, Bishan made her a promise he'd spend every remaining day keeping. "When we reach the northern country," he murmured into the darkness, voice soft and certain. "I'll build us a house. Maybe not some fancy spread like your father's, but solid, warm, ours. A place where we can put down roots and fill every room with kids, laughter, love, until the walls themselves shine with it." Zerelda smiled against his chest, a deep, bone-melting contentment settling over her like warm sunlight. "Kids?" she teased softly. "Lots of kids," he answered with quiet conviction, and she could hear the grin in his voice. "Little ones with your golden hair and sky-blue eyes tearing through the mountains, speaking both our tongues, carrying both our blood, or maybe with my dark eyes and your wild spirit." "Both?" she murmured, fingers tracing lazy circles across his chest. "Both," he said firmly. "They'll be the living bridge between two worlds, proof that love can take things that were supposed to stay broken apart and make something strong, something beautiful instead." 2 weeks later, as soon as the trails cleared enough to travel safely, they left. Bishan, Zerelda, and 23 others who chose to follow set out north toward land that promised freedom and a fresh start. They moved with caution, skirting towns and army patrols, threading through country that grew wilder and more breathtaking with every mile. The journey stretched nearly 4 months, carrying them from late winter through the green rush of spring into early summer. They faced hard days, sickness, injuries, treacherous river fords, tense brushes with groups that didn't welcome strangers crossing their ground. Yet they also met wonders, valleys carpeted in wildflowers, peaks that seemed to pierce heaven itself, forests so deep and emerald they felt like cathedrals built by nature. Zerelda learned more in those hard months than all her years in Santa Fe schools ever taught her. She learned to read the land's signs, to find hidden water, to spot plants that could heal or feed. She fell into the rhythm of traveling with a band, felt the strength that grows when hardship is shared, understood how suffering together forges ties thicker than blood. And through every mile, Bishan stayed beside her, guiding, guarding, loving her with a steady devotion that never faltered, no matter how rough the trail became. They reached their new home in late summer, a broad valley tucked far north, where mountains stood like silent giants and clear, icy streams cut through rich soil. It lay remote enough for peace, yet fertile enough to raise crops and run game. The nearest white settlement sat 3 hard days' ride away, too distant for meddling, close enough for trade when they chose. It was perfect. It was home. They built their cabin together, log by log, stone by stone, simple but strong, with a wide stone fireplace and windows that looked out over the valley floor. That first autumn, Zerelda planted a garden, coaxing stubborn vegetables from rocky ground with patient hands and sheer will. Bishan hunted and trapped, bartering furs with the few wandering trappers who passed through for things they couldn't make or grow themselves. When the first snow fell that winter, they married the Apache way beneath a sky thick with stars, friends standing witness to their vows. Zerelda wore a dress Goyon had helped her sew, covered in beautiful beadwork that took months of careful nights. Bishan wore his finest buckskins, long hair braided with eagle feathers and trade beads. As they spoke their promises, to honor and shield each other through whatever came, to walk side by side no matter the trail, joy so deep it felt like it poured from her very bones filled Zerelda. This wasn't the grand society wedding her father had once mapped out, with crowds and silk and crystal. This was something rarer. 2 souls binding themselves in front of the people who'd become her real family, blessed by the mountains, the stars, and the love that had carried them here. Their first year wasn't easy. Isolation bit hard sometimes. The work never ended. Winters cut deep. Zerelda missed certain comforts of her old life. Hot baths, soft mattresses, stacks of books whenever she wanted them. But every night she fell asleep in Bishan's arms, and every morning she woke to his quiet smile. That was worth more than all the fine things in the world. In the spring of their second year in the valley, Zerelda realized she was carrying a child. The news flooded Bishan with a joy so bright it almost hurt to look at. He turned even more protective, urging her to rest, bringing her special foods he thought would help the baby, speaking softly to her growing belly as though the little one could already hear every word of love and promise he poured out. Hear every word, every vow of love and safety he whispered to the little life growing inside her. "You're going to make one hell of a father," Zerelda told him one evening as they sat side by side on the porch, watching the sunset spill orange, purple, and molten gold across the sky. "I hope so," Bishan answered, hand resting gently on her rounded belly, feeling the baby kick against his palm like it already knew his voice. "I want to give our kids everything. Love, safety, the room to grow into whoever they damn well please. I want them to carry both our bloodlines proud, never forced to pick one side over the other." "They'll have all that," Zerelda promised, laying her hand over his, "because they'll have you for a father, and a mother who'll fight tooth and nail against anyone who tries to tell them they don't fit." Their daughter came into the world in early spring, under a soft snowfall that carried Zerelda straight back to the day she and Bishan first locked eyes in the storm. The labor dragged long and hard, with Goyon and 2 other women who'd brought many babies into the world guiding her through the old ways. But when Zerelda finally cradled her daughter close, every ache vanished, replaced by a fierce, almost frightening love that flooded every inch of her. The baby had Bishan's deep, dark eyes and Zerelda's golden hair, a perfect merging of their 2 worlds, just as they'd dreamed. They named her Lozen, after the eternal blossom in Bishan's tongue. When Bishan held his daughter for the first time, tears tracked silently down his cheeks, tears of pure joy, of overwhelming gratitude, of wonder that something so flawless, so innocent, so beautiful could exist in a world that had shown him mostly cruelty and pain. "She's perfect," he whispered, voice rough and thick. "She's ours," Zerelda said, smiling through her own tears. "The first of many, if you meant what you said about filling this house with kids." "Every damn word," Bishan promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead, then to their daughter's tiny head. "This place will overflow with children, laughter, love." 2 years later they had a son, strong and bold like his father, with a laugh that could brighten the blackest day. They named him Twish, after the sparrowhawk, and he lived up to it with endless energy and fearless spirit. Their home rang with children's voices, wrapped in the warmth of family, filled with the kind of love that reshapes everything it touches. Bishan taught them to respect the land, to carry pride in both their Apache roots and their mother's English blood. Zerelda taught them letters and words, sharing the books she'd carried from her old life, opening doors to new ideas and far-off places. The little community they'd started grew slow but steady. Others drifted in, Apache escaping the reservations, freedmen looking for true freedom, white folks who never fit in town life. What bound them was simple: a hunger for peace, for acceptance, for a place where no one judged or persecuted. Kuruk rode up now and then with word from the south. The razor wind still held on, adapting, finding ways to keep their ways alive even as the world shifted fast around them. He always left with a genuine smile, happy to see his old friend so settled, so at peace. On their 10th anniversary, they sat together on the porch watching Lozen and Twish race through the meadow with the younger ones. 3 more now, 2 girls and another boy. Zerelda leaned her head on Bishan's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Stepping down as leader? Leaving your people behind in the south? Everything you gave up to be with me?" Bishan stayed silent a moment, eyes on his children, their laughter drifting on the warm summer breeze. "I traded one life for another," he said at last, arm tightening around her. "Gave up war for peace, loneliness for love, just scraping by for really living. How could I regret that? But you were born to lead. You were meant for great things. I am leading," he said, nodding toward the playing children and the small cluster of homes around them. "I'm guiding them into a future where Apache and white can live in the same family, the same heart, where love beats hate, where belonging matters more than bloodlines. That's bigger than any war I could have fought." Zerelda kissed him then, tasting the salt of their shared tears. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth. "I'll love you till my last breath and beyond," Bishan vowed, cupping her face with the same gentle touch he'd first shown her in that snowy clearing so many years ago. "Our love lives on in our kids, in their kids, in every generation after. We started something here, Zerelda, something that'll never die." As the sun dipped low, painting the valley in crimson and gold, the children came running, laughing, shouting about birds they'd chased, flowers they'd gathered, adventures they'd spun from nothing. Bishan scooped Lozen high and spun her in the air, while Zerelda pulled Twish close, the other three tumbling around them like excited pups. They were a family, Apache and English, warrior and rancher's daughter, two souls who never should have crossed paths, but had found in each other everything they'd been missing all along. In the years that followed, 3 more children arrived, 2 daughters and another son. Each one different, each one cherished beyond measure. The house rang with noise, life, love. Zerelda taught them all to read, to question, to think for themselves. Bishan taught them wilderness skills, respect for the land, strength tempered with kindness. The children grew up fluent in English and Apache, proud of both heritages, fully part of neither world, yet completely belonging to both. They were living, breathing proof that the chasm between peoples could be crossed, that love could take what once seemed permanently torn apart and forge something fresh, something beautiful from the pieces. When Lozen turned 16, a young trapper's son from 3 valleys over fell head over heels for her. Bishan watched them together and saw his own story replayed, the same fierce, impossible pull, the same soul-deep recognition that some things are simply meant to be. "She takes after you," he murmured to Zerelda, as they watched Lozen laugh at something the boy said, her face glowing with pure delight. "She's got your fire," Zerelda answered, her hand slipping into his as easy and natural as breathing. "And your quiet certainty when you know what you want." The young man came asking for Lozen's hand, and Bishan gave his blessing, reading the same steady devotion in the boy's eyes that he'd carried for Zerelda all these years. They threw a big gathering that drew the whole patchwork community together. Apache kin, freedmen, white homesteaders, trappers, traders, and families from neighboring valleys. It was a true blending of worlds, the very thing their own marriage had quietly started 2 decades earlier. As Bishan watched his daughter stand under the open sky and speak her vows, her face shining with the same radiant joy Zerelda had worn on their wedding day, he felt his wife's hand find his again. "We did it," she whispered, voice thick with feeling. "We proved love can span any gap, outlast any storm." "We proved more than that," Bishan replied, eyes never leaving Lozen's glowing smile. "We showed that 2 people willing to stake everything on each other can change the world, 1 family, 1 generation at a time." And they had. Their children and grandchildren fanned out across the territories, carrying the quiet legacy of a love that refused to bow to hate, prejudice, or the harsh lines men drew between peoples. They grew into teachers, healers, leaders, bridge builders, folks who knew the world was stronger and richer for its differences, that real power came from standing together instead of tearing apart, that love was always worth the fight. Bishan and Zerelda aged side by side in the sturdy house they'd raised with their own hands. Hair turned silver, steps grew slower, but their love never faded. If anything, it deepened, rooted in decades of shared hardships, shared laughter, the family they'd built, the community they'd nurtured, the quiet legacy they'd leave behind. On a soft spring morning when Zerelda was 71 and Bishan 76, they sat on the wide porch of their expanded home, watching their great-grandchildren chase each other across the same meadow where their own kids had once played. "I've had a good life," Zerelda said quietly, her hand resting in his, fingers laced the way they'd been for more than 50 years. "The best life," Bishan agreed, thumb stroking gently over her knuckles in the familiar rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. "Better than anything I could have pictured back when I was just a young warrior trying to keep my people alive." "I love you," she said, the words as strong and true as the first time she'd spoken them in that snowy clearing so long ago. "And I love you," Bishan answered, lifting her hand to his lips in the same tender gesture he'd made the day they parted after their first meeting. Always and forever. They sat in easy silence, hands clasped as the sun climbed higher. All around them their family, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the wider community that had grown from their first brave choice kept living the life they'd dreamed. A legacy of love that had beaten hate, of hope that had outshone despair, of proof that sometimes the heart knows exactly where it belongs from the very first glance. For Bishan and Zerelda, it had known from that snowy battlefield moment when their eyes met across chaos and their souls reached for each other. One look had been enough to rewrite their futures, to spark a love story that would echo down through the generations. They'd begun as enemies and become true partners, risked everything, and gained more than they ever dreamed. They had shown that real, fierce, unbreakable love could tear down old worlds and build far better ones in their place. The end. Dear listener, there's one quiet moment in this tale that keeps coming back to me. Not the wild rescue or the big declarations of love, but something smaller, something deeper. It's Zerelda, raised in silk and silver, learning to sew buckskin with hands that shake just a little, planting seeds in stubborn, rocky ground and wondering if anything will take root, speaking her first clumsy words in Apache, and finally earning those gentle smiles from the women who once watched her with guarded eyes. She started over at an age when the world says your story's already written. And maybe that's why you're here tonight, tucked in the dark, listening to love stories. Maybe you know what it feels like when life rips away everything familiar and forces you to become someone new. Not because you chose it, but because the old you no longer fits. The dreams you had, the future you pictured, it dissolved like fog in the morning sun. Here's the truth I want you to carry with you. Starting over isn't defeat. It's the bravest damn thing a person can do. Zerelda didn't just survive in that mountain camp. She uncovered parts of herself her father's big house had kept buried for years. Strength she never knew she had. Joy she'd never been allowed to claim. A wild streak in her spirit that had waited, patient as stone, for the chance to breathe free. You've got that same wildness inside you. I don't care what the mirror tells you about your age, or what the world says about your chances. There's something untamed in your soul that time, loss, and hard knocks can't kill. Maybe it's been hushed so long you forgot it was there. Maybe life taught you to shrink, to be easy, to take up less room. Maybe you learned to say sorry for wanting, for feeling, for being too much or not enough. But it's still waiting. Tonight, as you settle in to rest, make peace with one thing. You don't need every answer figured out. Bishan and Zerelda didn't have a map when they rode north into the unknown. They had love, sure, but they also had doubt, fear, nights when they wondered if they'd made the worst mistake of their lives. They built their world one small choice at a time, one log stacked on another, one seed pressed into soil, one kind word to a stranger who became kin, one morning when they woke up and chose to try again. That's all any of us ever really do. You've been doing it all along, opening your eyes each morning even when grief sat heavy on your chest, offering kindness when your own heart was cracked, finding reasons to smile when the world gave you every excuse to quit, whispering hope into the dark even when you weren't sure anyone heard. That's your love story right there. Maybe not the one you dreamed of when you were young and the road looked wide open, but a real one. A true one, a story of a soul that wouldn't let bitterness win, that chose softness in a hard land, that kept believing in beauty when it felt impossibly far away. Bishan told Zerelda their love would live on in their children, their grandchildren, and it did. Generations carrying the truth that love outlasts hate, that connection is stronger than any divide. Your love lives on, too, in every person you've touched with kindness, every quiet grace you've offered a world that didn't always deserve it, every time you showed someone else how to keep going when everything said stop. You've been someone's Bishan, someone's Zerelda, the one who proved impossible things can happen, that hearts can heal, that it's never too late to choose love over fear. So tonight, as sleep comes, let go of the need to be perfect. Let go of regret. Let go of the voice that says you should have done more, been more, had more. You are exactly who you were meant to be. Scarred, yes, weathered by storms, absolutely, but also beautiful in ways only time and depth can carve. Beautiful in your resilience, beautiful in your tenderness, beautiful in your refusal to let the world make you cruel. Close your eyes now, dear one. Let your body sink heavy into rest. Let your mind release tomorrow's worries. You are safe, you are loved, you are enough. And when morning comes, and it will, you'll rise again. Not because you have to, not because anyone's watching, but because that's what survivors do. That's what warriors do. That's what hearts filled with quiet, stubborn, magnificent love do. Sleep deep. Dream sweet. Tomorrow can wait. Tonight is for rest. With all our gratitude, the Wild West Whisperers team, thank you for riding this trail with us to the end. We hope the story warmed your heart, stirred your spirit, and reminded you that true love doesn't know boundaries, not of blood, not of culture, not of time. If this tale moved you, please subscribe, like, drop a comment, and share it with someone who still believes in the power of love. Your support keeps Wild West Whisperers alive and gives us the fire to keep telling stories of emotion, redemption, and the kind of love that changes everything. And don't ride off just yet. Another unforgettable story starts right after this. Click through and lose yourself in more moments that stay with you long after the fire dies down. One seed pressed into stubborn dirt, one quiet kindness offered to a stranger who soon became kin, one dawn when they woke and chose, again, to keep going. That's all any of us really have. Small, stubborn choices stacked day after day. You've lived long enough to know fairy tale endings don't drop from the sky in one shining instant. The love that endures is hammered out in 1,000 plain, everyday moments. Choosing each other when it's hard. Choosing hope when everything screams quit. Choosing to believe tomorrow might be kinder than today. And you've been doing exactly that, haven't you? Every morning you opened your eyes, even when grief sat like lead on your chest. Every gentle act you gave when your own heart was in pieces. Every time you found a reason to smile, though the world handed you every excuse to break. Every night you whispered a wish, a prayer, a scrap of hope into the dark, even when you weren't sure anyone heard. That's your love story. Maybe not the one you sketched out when you were young, and the horizon looked endless, but a real one. A true one. A story of a soul that wouldn't let bitterness take root, that held on to softness in a rough land, that kept seeing beauty even when it felt 1,000 miles away. Bishan told Zerelda their love would carry on through their children, their grandchildren. And it did. Generations walking forward with the quiet truth that love outlasts hate, that connection runs deeper than any divide. Your love carries on, too. In every life you've touched with kindness, every moment of grace you offered when the world gave none back, every time you showed someone else how to stand when everything said fall. You've been someone's Bishan, someone's Zerelda, the steady hand that proved impossible things can happen, that broken hearts can mend, that it's never too late to choose love over fear. So tonight, as sleep finally finds you, set down the heavy load of needing to be perfect. Let go of regret. Silence the mean voice that whispers you should have done more, been more, achieved more. You are exactly who you were meant to be. Scarred, yes. Weathered by hard storms, no question. But also beautiful in ways only time and trials can carve. Beautiful in your staying power. Beautiful in your gentle heart, beautiful in your refusal to let the world turn you hard. Close your eyes now, dear one. Let your body settle heavy into the bed. Let your mind loosen its grip on tomorrow's troubles. You are safe, you are loved, you are enough, and when morning comes, and it will, you'll rise again. Not because you must, not because eyes are watching, but because that's what warriors do. That's what survivors do. That's what souls full of quiet, stubborn, magnificent love do. Sleep deep. Dream gentle. Tomorrow can wait. Tonight belongs to rest. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening, and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories, from our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal bara disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.